Let's talk to Peter Hitchens. It's time for our weekly conversation. Peter, very good morning to you.
Morning to you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us once more. And more, I suppose, sort of investigative work on your behalf has led to you asking the Department of Health precisely what is the point of these quarantines.
Well, I thought that I genuinely thought this. I wasn't trying to be satirical, as I sometimes am. I genuinely thought that if they were telling people to destroy expensive and long-awaited holidays and rush home in the middle of the night and drag their children onto extremely expensive, lately booked flights and do all these things because of an imposed quarantine, I thought that they were serious about it. I thought they must genuinely believe, as I personally do not, that there were some danger to the country by people holidaying in Spain. Now, so I asked, waiting for nearly a month after the July the 25th Spanish quarantine, I asked how many people had actually been quarantined. I asked what information they had on how many had developed infections, how many had been hospitalized, and if applicable, how many had died. And instead of an answer, I got blethers. I got nothing. First of all, I was told, try Public Health England. This is the day
Was that shortly before it was destroyed?
Day before it was abolished.
Right.
Public Health England actually were quite cooperative, and they said, OK, well, we'll try to answer the question if that's what they say. But I continued to press the Department of Health as well. Then Public Health England got in touch with me and said, sorry, we can't answer that. You have to go back to the Department of Health. They then basically sent me a background statement, which was just a statement more or less of policy. It didn't say anything at all about the figures that I asked for. It was as if I hadn't asked them. It was actually verging on the insulting. They didn't say we aren't prepared to divulge these figures, or they didn't say we haven't got them. They just answered a question I hadn't asked. And when I wrote to them and said, surely this is some mistake, no, they said it's not a mistake. And then I said, well, in that case, I obviously have to say what I'm going to say, which is that you appear not to know anything about something which is very serious. And that's what I'm doing. I've obviously put in the Freedom of Information inquiry on this now, and I'll be interested to see how much success that has. Right. A lot of people who aren't in journalism, and by the way, members of the public can do Freedom of Information inquiries.
They can. It's quite difficult, though, to navigate the system, isn't it? Because
it's difficult to do, but what I should say to people is that in many cases it isn't a magic bullet. It doesn't mean that they actually cough up the information you're asking for, and I suspect in this case that will be so, that I will get an answer which is not an answer,
right?
Or maybe I'll be told it's too expensive to.
Do you think it's because they don't actually? Do you think it's because they don't actually know the answer?
Well, my suspicion has to be that they don't know the answer, but I can't say for certain because I don't know. But surely if they had the answer, they'd tell me.
Yes.
The other possibility is that the answer was that that of the people who got home too late to escape the quarantine, they either haven't made any great effort to survey them, or the answers that have come back from those that have been quarantined is that none of them have actually fallen ill.
Right.
Which undermine their propaganda, which is constantly to keep us in a state of fear about something which, frankly, doesn't justify the measures being taken against
quite.
it.
Well, I mean, I've said this before, and I think I may have even said it to you last week, that, it's one thing when they say we must test everybody, we must be testing people all the time because testing is the answer. And then when you say, well, why don't you test people when they come back from holiday, and that way you can judge whether or not to quarantine them. Oh, no, well, the thing is, testing isn't entirely the answer. And you go, well, you can't have it both ways. Either testing is the answer or it's not the answer. Which is it?
Well, because they can have it both ways, and they do. And what they do is they send battalions of testers into places like Leicester and surge through the suburbs of that city looking for cases, as they call them, of people who are, say, the principal symptom of COVID-19 in Britain today is that you are perfectly healthy.
Yes.
And that statement, which is absolutely true, it seems to me to sum up the whole nature of everything. That these people who are these cases that are being found, and so we're told that Birmingham has to close down, or half the towns in the Pennines have to close down, or whatever. These people who are being found are not ill.
Yes. Well, this is the thing.
They don't. And I believe I haven't been able to confirm. I believe that in hospitals in England the other day there were no deaths from COVID at all. Certainly, the daily deaths, according to the official statistics, are now bumping around the zero mark. August 19th, 16, August the 20th, 6, August the 21st. What have we got? August 21st, August 22nd, 18. But it's really tiny, and of course this has been declining since April the 8th. And that is the true figure that they should be publicising, but they don't, and which the media should be publicising. but especially the BBC, which is completely committed to sustaining this panic, don't actually cover properly and are astonished when anyone gets through their barricades and comes onto a BBC program and says, actually, it isn't that serious.
Right. Well, it's come to something,
They
Peter,
themselves have fooled themselves into believing that it is a huge 1918-style pandemic, which it simply isn't.
Well, it comes to something, does it not? And I'm not in any way denigrating what you do, but that you as a newspaper columnist and me as a radio presenter are the only people seemingly left that actually ask proper questions anymore. Because I'm looking at a story now, Mail Online, huge COVID outbreak shuts Dundee school. 17 staff and 2 pupils test positive. Surely the question should be, well, how sick are they? Are any of them actually ill?
I mean, it should be, but that just people just don't seem to ever ask this question: how many of these people are ill?
Yeah.
And then we had this whole performance of the medical officers of all the 4 countries of the United Kingdom on Saturday night, putting out this statement saying it was perfectly safe to go back to school. Well, you could make exactly the same statement about any place of work.
Right.
It's the levels of danger. I'm running this campaign at the moment, the Tortoise Campaign.
Right.
Which is I'm telling people that they should be really, really worried about tortoises falling from the sky, because 2,500 years ago, the Greek dramatist and tragedian Aeschylus, sunning himself on holiday in Sicily, was killed when an eagle, mistaking his bald head for a rock, dropped a tortoise on it.
Right.
And it must be about time this happened again, do you not think?
I imagine we must be very careful.
Years, the chances of it are probably statistically much the same of a healthy person dying of COVID in this country. So let's all wear anti-tortoise helmets. And I'm suggesting that eagles should probably be blindfolded if they can be found, so they can't see, and tortoises greased so eagles can't pick them up.
Yes.
And I think we should take serious precautions against this danger, because it's exactly comparable. The danger of having an eagle drop a tortoise on your head in modern Britain is exactly comparable to the danger of actually dying.
Well, this is the thing. I mean, there are many things to be frightened of. I mean, some of them exist, some of them don't exist. You can be frightened. You can have night terrors and therefore never go to sleep on the basis that you might be frightened by something that you dream
monsters
about.
Under my bed.
Well, exactly right.
Like everybody else.
But the trouble is, though, that there are so many people. I mean, I've been having an ongoing sort of row over the weekend with people who say how great it is to work from home and how nonsensical it is for them to ever go back to work in an office, because they much prefer working from home, because they get much more done, they get to see their children, and they get to actually not commute anywhere. But unfortunately, we are a sociable bunch of creatures, and actually getting to meet other people is probably a good thing rather than a bad thing.
Well, it's essential in so many jobs
that
you are in actual physical contact with the people you're dealing with, for the germination of ideas, for making sure that people communicate properly, and for so many other things. We didn't all go to work in factories and offices by accident. We did it because it was necessary and important for the economy. I remember there was a time when a lot of people did work from home, and now they don't. And I don't know whether people may be telling themselves that they're working harder when they work from home, which makes one wonder how hard they were working when they were.
Well, I mean, of course, we only got their word for that, haven't we?
That's the point, is it?
No.
And the other thing is, of course, the devastation that this visits on the economy, particularly of London. Which is you may say, well, I don't care about London, and a lot of
that's
people
what they do say.
But the problem with that is that London, whether you like it or not, is a vital part of our economy, and if London dies, then that will affect everybody, because it is such a huge part of our economy. And it will, just as people say, well, what does it matter if landlords are not getting their rent? Well, I say it matters because your pension
is very much so.
Certainly based on the rent that's paid to those landlords. And if that collapses, then your pension will collapse. And people don't realise how economies join up at the back.
Exactly right. And that is quite depressing to me at the moment. But let me give you a couple of good examples of going back to school. Your kids are probably older now. I've got still 2 kids in the school system. We've had an email from my 13-year-old's school, which says that all years will be sort of isolated amongst themselves. Basically, they won't meet in years, the year above or the year below. They'll go to different lunch groups. They'll go to different break times. And if you are going to drive your children to school, you must not mix with any other people from any other household, despite the fact that people from other households are going to be mixing in the classroom. It's a sort of form of madness.
Some schools are making the children wear face masks or visors, I see, in Scotland. Every previously normal experience is being turned into something rather like a visit to a mortuary.
Yeah.
And every human being is being treated like a toxic danger, and the damage that this does to society is huge. But the terrible things that one hears about people with elderly relatives in care homes and the limited contact they've been allowed to have with them are actually the word tragic simply does not begin to encompass the totally unnecessary unhappiness and loss. People who were perfectly healthy and happy before this began, forced into this isolation, deprived of human contact, have sunk into terrible physical and mental states because they've been deprived of the company of their families. And this seems to me to be actually actively cruel, and it should be stopped.
But worse than that is this, this overburdening kind of group of people who seem to think that they never ever want to mix with anybody else ever again. They're quite happy to work in their little pod at home, seeing only their family, nobody else, not really going anywhere apart from to the local coffee shop, not going to ever getting on a train, not ever going anywhere far away from where they live. I mean, it's a kind of backwardness about it.
There is, but it is an effect, of course, that the internet has had on quite a lot of people. These unfortunate persons who sit in basements quietly converting sugary drinks into human lard and posting unpleasant messages on Twitter.
I see you had a couple of those,
but
weekend.
let's all try not to turn into them.
Yes.
Seems to me to be they would seem to me to be a warning, not an example.
Yes, quite.
And I think that society is society. It involves mingling with people. Even misanthropes like me, we need a bit of social contact.
Well, it's good for us, and I mean it's good for everybody. And you're absolutely right that it's a danger if that does not ever come back. But I mean, what confidence do you have? I know you don't have much confidence in Boris Johnson and the government, but what confidence do you have, say for example, that if we do get everybody back to school, that might act as some kind of catalyst for everything else?
Well, I hope it does, because although I'm not an optimist, I can see there's a possibility that it might. It's certainly a complete precondition. The way our society is organized, where very, very few mothers or indeed fathers are now at home to look after their children, means there have to be schools or people can't go out to work. So it is a precondition. But one hears from Scotland of quite a lot of cases of schools opening and then closing again in panics. And I think this is what we will see, that the schools will open again. But then very, very quickly, lots of them will, on the excuse of supposed spreading infections, will close again. And that I'm not at all sure this will be this will be a success. And of course, we know that the teachers' unions are far from committed to it and will not, how should we say, make any special effort to make a success of it. So I think we should keep our fingers crossed as to whether it will work. I don't say it might, but I think we can expect quite a lot of reclosings between now and Christmas.
Yeah, I mean, the noises that I'm currently hearing from certainly some of the unions and even some members of the Labour Party in the opposition are clearly, they're sort of laying the groundwork for things not to go smoothly, it seems to me.
Well, who knows? I mean, I don't want to make accusations where they're not justified. It's possible. I mean, I have an ambivalent attitude towards trade unions because I was a Labour correspondent for a long time. They do sometimes do good, and I won't entirely.
Well, some of them do
treat them as villainous because they're important. But I just don't get the impression there's a huge commitment in the major teaching union, particularly for the reopening, and I think it should have happened long before this and would have happened long before this if it hadn't been for them.
Yes.
I think that ought to be remembered.
No, quite. No, I'm indebted to you as well for educating me about something which I didn't know about, and that's St Bartholomew's Day. You put out a tweet yesterday saying that our conversation today would be coinciding with the anniversary of St Bartholomew's Day, which sounds dreadful. And I looked up what it was.
Appalling.
It really was a horrendous massacre, wasn't it?
Yes, and it soured the relations between Britain and France for a very, very long time, and of course it caused huge grief in the whole history of France ever afterwards. You still see, and I think it's in the Rue de Rivoli in Paris. There's still a monument to the murder of Admiral Coligny, the Huguenot leader who was murdered that night. And this shocking betrayal of what had been a compromise. Again, it shows the value of compromise in politics. But no, it's extraordinary that we should. This would have been a remembered thing 100 years ago when people knew history, but it's not now.
No, well, certainly not if the BBC have got anything to do with it, because I don't know whether you wish to enter into the argument about last night the Proms, but certainly there will be many who will do, and we'll be taking a lot of calls on it later on today. But I mean, again, the BBC kind of shoots itself in the foot here, doesn't it? Because it probably won't end up doing it, but it makes out that it might want to.
Well, I don't know. I think that this problem has come up before, hasn't it, with Land of Hope and Glory?
Yes.
And it's obvious the BBC hates all that kind of thing.
Right.
And because they hate it, one feels that one needs to stand up for it. But something which I said would come back to haunt me if I got too involved in this. Some months ago, I said, well, given our complete and utter flaccid, supine reaction to the shutdown of our society and the attack on our personal liberty from March onwards, it strikes me as rather difficult for anyone to stand up and say Britons never, never, never will be slaves.
Yeah.
And as for Britannia ruling the waves, well, coming from an old naval family, I can tell you it certainly doesn't. I mean, half the Royal Navy is immobilized by the quayside because they can't get the ships to move.
Yes,
and
but I mean, in some ways...
We're not a maritime power. So if people want to sing it, well, okay, that's fine by me. It's a great song. But what it actually says is something which is no longer true. We don't rule the waves, or even indeed rule the waves around our own shores, as is evident from what's going on the Channel at the moment. And what's more, we are perfectly happy to be ordered about by bullying governments into doing things which, frankly, we ought not to do. So before you sing it, ask yourself, do you really mean it?
Yes, no, I think you're absolutely right. However, there is such a thing as enjoyment, which obviously the BBC has forgotten how to do. I worry that you may have forgotten how to do it, Peter, as well. But
I have a life of total misery. I must go off in a minute and lash myself.
I know, get the old hair shirt back. Yeah, get it out of the dry cleaners.
Whip.
But the thing is, right, that there are many things which I find uplifting in life, and I'm not a massive fan of the Last Night of the Proms, and I'm not a massive fan of doing anything as a group. But it's a lovely song, and it's a wonderful thing, and I think that there's something wrong with an institution which calls itself British, which is somehow against it.
Yeah, when I was growing up, we knew the words.
Yeah.
And what those words say is something that's very, very different. We also used to sing at school when I was small another song to the tune of Jeremiah Clark's trumpet, Voluntary Britons Sing That All the World Shall Know We're Free. And the whole thing is now totally unsingable because it's not true. And I think if you know the words, it becomes harder.
Well, so does God Save the Queen, in a way.
Well, there are some verses of that I think people would probably be quite reluctant to sing now.
Well, the Scots don't like it, do they?
Wade,
the second verse.
But on the other hand, the verse everybody sings and some people know is pretty harmless, I should have thought.
But I think the worry that I have...
It doesn't engage you in claiming that you're the kind of person who stands up to the government when it pushes you around either, which Rule Britannia does.
No, but of course that's because those of us who do stand up to bullies don't actually need to sing about it. And we certainly don't need to surround ourselves with other people singing about it either. We just do it. But what about the juxtaposition of the BBC wanting to get rid of it and instead replace it with what Lord Hall of Birkenhead, rather hilariously calls himself, he says that the BBC can be the nation's voice. Well, I don't think so.
Well, no, just imagine a song about that.
Exactly.
It's bound to be the Christmas #1, isn't it?
Well, quite. I mean, the thing is, we are ruled, unfortunately, not by government. We are ruled by the people that run the BBC. We are ruled by the people that run the civil service. I mean, we have seen over the course of the last several weeks that, actually, the sorts of things that we are being sort of culturally fed are not at all coming from anywhere but these kind of higher learning institutions. And that's what I object to.
Yes, but it works, and that's the problem with it.
Not on me,
when I 20 years ago wrote my book about the abolition of Britain, said, "Oh, come on, stop being so ridiculous. What's being abolished?" And now everyone says, "Yes, see what you mean," which is my fate.
Yes.
20 years later, everyone sees what I mean.
Well, this is the trouble. You've been a soothsayer for too long now. I'm going to finish it with a great tweet here from somebody called 80s Music Man. He says, "So I suppose Chris Whitty will be backing the forced wearing of tortoise helmets now. Please don't give him any more ideas, Peter."
Well, I know, but I think I've decided that it seems to me that some of the most successful undermining of bad government has been done by mocking it.
Yes, I think that's the only way.
The tortoise helmet, control the tortoise. I wear my tortoise helmet to protect you. is
save lives
possibly
as well.
more likely to get somewhere than actually setting out, as I have done ceaselessly now for 5 months, the facts, the arguments, the figures, the experts I quote over and over and over again. What difference has that made? No, so let's laugh at them instead and see whether that works.
I think that's a good plan.
Beyond the Fringe, and that was the week that was, overthrew a whole system of government in this country in the 1960s by laughing at it. So maybe this is the answer.
I think we finally hit upon something. Well played. Thank you very much indeed. Peter Hitchens, Mail on Sunday columnist